So for today's project, we're going to finally put up a dartboard the wife got me for the office. There's been a bit of a debate. She said she got it 3 years ago. I say I got it 2 years. The point is we got it out of the box and there's very little directions and instructions with it. So the first thing we got to figure out, there are specific measurements to a dartboard. So this bullseye needs to be 5 foot 8 inches off the ground. So what I did was I measured and put a mark up on the wall for 5 foot 8 from the floor. The way this particular dartboard assembles is a little different. Normally you got to do a lot more math and figure it out and then adjust for when you put the board up. So see, this one comes in a case. So how am I going to put that 5 foot 8 bullseye in the right place? So my guess is, you can see there's two holes here in the center. My assumption is that you take that hook and apply it to that, and then when it hangs down from that hook, the center of the bullseye is going to line up with those two holes. What that means is I got to somehow line these two holes up with that mark on the wall, and it all should be perfectly aligned. So let's do a bit more measurements and then we'll see how that's going to work out. Because I don't want to drill the holes into the studs in the wall and get it situated and then we have a problem. Let me set everything else up and we'll come right back. As I said, the task at hand now is to figure out, do I come down so that the center of the bullseye is on that mark? Now the challenge is we got to figure out where to put the holes on this side and this side to hang the back of the actual board in the case. So the back of the board looks like this. There's a hole here with a slot and the same thing on this side. And so what we have to do is we have to figure out from that wall, where do we put the screws down from the ceiling such that when I hang it on the slot, can't do it from the center of the hole here, it has to be from the slot. This here lines up with the mark that I have on the wall. Let me get set up and we'll figure that out. One thing that I noticed about the back of this board is you have the circle here with the slot. The tip of the slot right here is pretty darn close to the edge of this frame. Now I measured from here to the top of the frame is 10.5 inches. So my guess is if I measure from the ceiling down, line this up with that line, and I measure from the ceiling down to the top of this slot or the bottom of the frame, when the screws heads go into the slot, we'll be in position for where the bullseye needs to be. The idea is we measure from there to the bottom of the frame exactly 10 inches. If I measure mark on the wall, or where these holes are, down from the ceiling to that mark, and then I measure up from that mark 10 inches, we should get where these slots will line up for the bottom of the frame. So let's get everything set up and we'll make some marks on the wall and see how that gets us. We're back at the wall, and so what I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to go up to the ceiling, measure down to the mark on the wall, and then measure up 10 inches and make a mark there. All right, so we're at 40.5. So doing the quick math, we're going to be at 30.5. That's going to be roughly right here. Now I'm not concerned yet that they're not in line yet. We'll get that in a second. I just want to make sure that the actual measurements are right. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to measure from that mark that I made down the 5'8" mark and make sure that it's 10 inches. And it's right on the mark. So let's get these marked out and centered and everything, and we'll start to drill some holes. So I don't know about you, but for me, I like to have the items that I hang on walls and so on to be somewhat symmetrical. So what we're going to do here, the desk, the corner there in the wall, I've measured that, it's 28 inches. And so what I want to do is I want to center the dartboard between the corner of that desk and the frame of the wall here. And so I measured that out, it's 28 inches. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure from that door frame out 14 inches for each of those two marks that I made. And that'll give me the center of where I need to align the bullseye and the dartboard to make sure that it's centered between the door and the desk. So let's get set up for that. We're going to measure out 14 inches. We're going to go to the first one, and there's a gap here. I'm not going to measure from the wall. I'm going to measure from the door frame because that's where visually it's going to sit. And so just need to be roughly on this one. We'll level it. So we'll mark it at 14. And then up here, we're going to mark it at 14. Same thing. Now, just as an idea, just so you get what I'm coming from here, I'm actually using the bottom line of the shadow here as a level line. Now, is it perfect? No. We'll get to that in a minute. But it gives me a general idea that that's where it's going to sit. So I know in the last part you couldn't see what I was talking about on the level line. So with the shadow. So you can see here just the shadow line of that tape measure. I can set it at 14 inches and then you raise it up here. Do the same thing. Now what I'm doing is I'm setting the shadow line on the mark that I made originally, coming over 14 inches and making a mark there. So that way I'm relatively sure, or pretty close. We'll get exact here in a minute. But you can see I can set the level line with the shadow and then make a mark at 14 inches. And then that's how we're starting to have this come together. So the next thing I want to do, I'm a little worried about how close that is going to be to the door. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that measurement and then we're going to figure out where the center and how wide the actual case is. And then we're going to figure out how close to the actual door it's going to get. This is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. So whenever I measure this, it's literally 19 7/8 across there. Why the hell somebody couldn't measure this to come out to 20 and just call it a day? I don't know. But why in the world would you make it such an odd fractional amount to find the center? In order to figure this out, I use an app called Fractions Plus. And I paid for it because I use it every once in a while. You put in the fraction, do the math, and it tells you exactly what the measurement is. Let's go do that. We'll mark the center here and then see where we are on the wall. So having calculated this down to 9 1/16, I go across the top, make the mark, and look at the center. So the center is right here. What we got to figure out is if it's 9 1/16 to the center, we now need to take that measurement, go to the wall, and see how close to the door it's going to actually get. Back at the wall, I'm going to take the topmost mark, and we're going to measure that 9 1/16 back to the door frame, and we're going to see how close that looks. It's not too bad. So let me see if I can get this so you can see it. So There's the measurement. It's going to be roughly here. So we're looking at probably 4 or 5 inches from the actual door. You're not going to be able to open the door all the way anyway, just because it's going to hit the case, but you'll be able to open it most of the way. I think we're good. I think we can start leveling these lines, drilling some holes. So if you remember the 2 holes from the case in the center, I'm guessing that the intent there was that when I draw the line where the bullseye is supposed to be on the wall, I can see the line through those holes and be able to line it up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line, a level line, where the bullseye mark at 5 foot 8 inches, big enough so that it can span, this way, so I can span those 2 holes, and then I'll be able to see the line on the wall whenever I line it up. Taking a level, put it on the line, and then you line it up. Now, what you're trying to do with a level, if you've never used one before, but what you're trying to do is there's a bubble in between here, and you're trying to take that and make sure that it's in between the 2 lines. So let's take a look at that for a second. So you got a bubble there in the middle. See when it moves? Well, whenever I tilt it and move it, you want to have that bubble in between those 2 black lines right there. All right. By the way, my shadow line that I used to make these 2 marks is pretty darn close to level. And I'm going to do the same for up here. All right, so now I got 2 lines up on the wall, just like that. And that's how we're going to start lining up our holes and making sure everything is good. One of the tricks that I did learn off the internet about this, that normally I would make measurements to figure out where the holes go on the wall for these 2 spots, and then end up doing a lot of math, and you figure out the sides, how far in and how far down, and you do all that kind of jazz. And yeah, you can do that, and it takes a lot of work to try to figure all that out. But one of the tricks that I learned off the internet was you take some painter's tape or masking tape. Because we said the bottom edge of this frame is where we want the slot to be, I want to take this tape and we're going to pull a strip off that's at least as long as the frame. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to line it up on the bottom of that frame as much as we can, just like that. So it's lined up about as close as we can get to the bottom of the frame. Now, what we're going to do this time is you're going to feel around here. You're going to feel a little impression of where that hole slot is. You're going to try to find the middle of it. Use your pencil to poke a hole. You're going to do the same over here. So we got a hole there and a hole over here. So let's go get set up on the wall, and I'll show you how to use this tape, the holes we made, and we should be good. One thing I forgot to mention, that mark we put up here for center, you actually want to mark that on your tape, because we're going to use that mark in order to line it up on the wall. Take that mark, find out the spot on your tape. Might be a little tricky because there's no backing. All right. So now I got a mark on the tape where the center is, and we'll use that to line it up to the mark on the wall. We're going to take our tape, come up here, find our mark. You're not going to be able to see it, but there's a mark on the tape here where the center was. We're going to take that center mark, we're going to line it up, the center mark, and then I'm going to line the top. So here's the question: do we line the top of the tape or the bottom of the tape, like this? I know it's hard to see, but let me put this up here and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's look up here. So the difference is, here's my mark, we lined it up with the center. Do I put the tape up like this above the line or do I put it below the line? So in the case that where we measured, we put the top of the tape on the bottom part of that frame. So that means that the holes line up from a reference point of above the tape. All right, so that means that the tops, this hole was the center of the big part of the hole in the frame. That means that it's going to probably sit just a hair lower. If we put them up like this at the top of the tape, when you put this hole in and then it slides down, it's going to slide down slightly right to where this mark is, this line. All right, that's our 10-inch line, remember, from here. If I put the tape below this line, when it sits in the slot, it's going to come down, and so you're going to end up just slightly below this mark, which is going to be, instead of 5 foot 8 inches, you're going to be like 5 foot 7 3/4 probably. So it does make a difference on whether you measure this above the line or below the line. In this case, we're going to make it above the line. So that way when it sits, it'll sit right here on that line. What we need to do here, where our holes are, and we're going to make our marks on the wall through the hole, just like that. Now I leveled it, the bottom of the tape, with our level line so that those lines there where the holes are should be even. So me being me, I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it in the center over there, and I'm going to measure to the middle of this hole. Comes out to roughly 18 1/8, right there. Now that's from the center of that hole to the center of that hole. Let's go in here, take our tape off the wall, just set that to the side for a second. And we're going to take a tape measure. We're going to measure from that first mark there to there, and it comes out to about 18 1/8. So we're good. And that seemed kind of crazy, but the idea was you wanted to make sure that that hole and that hole line up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to check it, make sure that we're all level. So we take the level and you put it on that line, put it on that line, and we look at our level, and we're bingo. Everything looks good. It's nothing worse than drilling holes in the wall and put your board up there and everything's all crooked. Now that we got all that done, well, I think we're ready to drill some holes. So I have one of these Harbor Freight boxes. They cost like $5 or so, maybe 7. I marked it hangers with the label gun. And so in here, I just keep a variety of things to hang stuff up with. So over here, I've got some, loops, got some wire here, different hooks, your typical plugs, various things. What we're going to use for this dartboard, I don't really screw around with this kind of stuff. Honestly, I go big or go home. So what I use is these giant plugs like this. Put them in, and then you use a screw to put it in. That sucker's not coming out no matter what. Typically these things hold like 50 pounds per screw, even though this thing, probably weighs maybe 10. I don't mess around. I put in, pretty beefy screws here. The challenge we got with these kind of things, even though I say that screw head may not fit in the case. So let's take a look. And it doesn't fit. Too big. So, got to come up with a different plan. Pick a smaller one. Let's see, do we have smaller ones? Smaller one. This is one of the reasons why I keep all this stuff together. Got smaller ones. That one looks smaller. Let's see if we got 2 of them. Yep. All right, let's go check this one out. And we're in business. You can see it fits up in the slot, fits in the head, in the slot. We're good. So now the trick is, we got 2 of those. We need to find the plugs that go with that. So let me find that real quick and I'll come right back. Well, we're in luck. The ones that I was pointing to earlier fit these just fine. So we're going to put them in that hole, screw them in, and then hang up the board. Let's find the drill bit that fits that. We'll get to drilling. You'll notice that I don't really have any directions telling me how big this is, like what the diameter is. How do you figure out which drill bit goes with this? A lot of it is trial and error. The problem is don't go big. Right? If you make the hole too big, that's going to be a problem because then this isn't going to fit very well. And if you go too big or bigger than this, it's just going to fall right into the wall. The trick is to get at least this big, but not that big on the tip. Let's just kind of figure this out. I'm guessing it's going to be this 5/16. So what you do is you can check it. It's smaller than that right there. It's roughly the same size as that, maybe a little bigger, but not by much. All right, so let's start with that and we'll see where we are. One thing we haven't covered yet, why am I not measuring for studs or checking for electrical lines? I can do that, but since I'm putting this plug in no matter what, I'm not really worried about where putting this in a stud. It's just going to go right where I'm going to put it in the drywall. Now, if I happen to hit a stud, what that means, I'm just going to use the screw. So when I drill into the drywall and if I feel there's a stud there, I'm going to switch the drill bit to a smaller bit size, the size of the screw, and not this size. So that way I can use the stud instead of the plug. Now electrical. So what I did was, off camera, I have one of these, right? I can put a link down in the description, and it also senses for electrical lines as well as studs. So it has an icon on here, and if you're going over it, it'll figure out that there's an electric current there, and it'll let me know. Now, this is kind of important because if you haven't seen on the video already, there is a plug down there. You do want to try to make sure that when you're putting these kind of things in, that you do check, not necessarily where the studs are. You want to check to make sure that you're not in the proximity of an electrical line. Now, typically, these plugs like this, they'll do a drop from the ceiling and come down like this. So yeah, you want to check it. I'm not overly concerned about that. We're not drilling too far into the wall to put the plugs, but it is something you want to check and make sure that you're not going to cause much bigger problems. So let's get these holes drilled and we'll put the plugs in and then we'll hang up the dartboard and we'll see how we did. So up to this point, it's what really drives my wife nuts, is because from the time I started all of this, it's probably been about a half hour. In her mind, she would just drill the holes, put them in, hang it up, call it a day. For me, I like to have a one and done, and it's got to be symmetrical. It's got to be aligned to the door. It's got to be aligned on the wall, and everything's got to be pretty much even. And so that's why I take quite a bit more time to do all this math and measurements to make sure that it's all right. So let's get these holes drilled. We'll get this plugs in and then we'll see how we did. I don't know if you figured it out. You are going to make a mess with this sort of thing. Just resign yourself to that fact and you'll be fine. So now we got both holes drilled. So let's see if the plugs will fit. Perfect. So the guess that we made was actually right on for the size of the hole. I hope you also figured out this is kind of the point of no return. Once you start drilling holes and putting things in the wall, you're kind of committed at this point. There's really no going back. If you don't get it right and it's not level, you pretty much have to start over and redo all your measurements. So that's one of the reasons why I take more time than you'd probably think to get it right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put these screws in for the holes, and when we come back, we'll hang up the dartboard. Did you really think I was going to do that by hand? I don't think so. These are some pretty long screws, and I'm not doing that by hand. Let's get this done. The thing about screwing these in is you want to leave just a little bit sticking out. Remember, because those screws got to fit into that hole, which come down on a slot. Same thing for that one. Let me get these in, and then we'll go grab the dartboard. All right, so there we go. Got the screws in, and let me go grab the dartboard and we'll have our moment of truth. We got the board up. It's in the slots like it said. And I did a measurement up to here. It's 5'8" and a little bit high. You know what? This isn't a professional job. I'm going to live with that. So it's just a little bit high, but not by much. You can barely see, you're not going to be able to see it on the video, but if I shine a big flashlight or a bright flashlight in here, which I did, you can kind of see the line at the bottom of that hole. So it's just a little bit high, but not by much. So let's get the dartboard in there and let's see how we did. This is one of those instances where you need to trust the process a little bit, which makes me a bit nervous. Remember I said it was just a little high? So once you put it on this hook, come down, the bracket right there, this measures out almost dead on. Now it bothers me a little bit that the freaking dartboard, this isn't even in the middle. Nothing I can do about that. This is pretty much dead on 5'8". There we go. The finished dartboard is up. And if you really want to check how you did, check your level. Everything looks good. Now, hold on. I'm off just a hair. There we go. All right, we're all level. And move it a little bit. Yep, now we got it level. Just had to shift it of the frame a little bit. I didn't show it on camera, but this frame moves. I don't know if you can see it here. See how it shifts a little bit? Probably should have freaking glued it before I put it up here. Now, this board's got some holes for the darts. The pencil came with its own darts, but I have my own. Those will just be extras. And then this will go in there, and then you can keep score. So there you go with the dartboard all set up, centered between the corner of the desk and the door at the right height. So another aspect of the dartboard, in addition to the height to the floor, is you have to measure out from the floor out this way, your shooting line. You'll see in the instructions here, it's 5'8" up to the bullseye. Now, I know this says 7'9", but it's technically 7'9¼ But again, this is a home installation. It's not professional league. So we're just going to go with 7'9". You can measure that out and, I don't know, put a piece of tape on the floor if you want. What I got is something way cooler. So let me unpack it and I'll show you what it is. All right, here's what I got. Ta-da. It's actually a laser line. Now, what this thing does is you mount it underneath here on the dartboard. You hit a switch and it projects a laser line out from underneath there out to your measurement on the floor. That way you don't necessarily have to put any tape or anything down on the floor. All you have to do is just hit the button on the laser and it projects down here on the floor. So pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out of the box, see what the instructions say and how we're going to mount it underneath the dartboard, and then I'll show you how to do that. So the instructions here are pretty straightforward. You have these mounting holes here and you put the screws into there. You're done. Now, they sent me this kind of stuff, which, yeah, that's not going to happen in the bottom of this board here, because you got to remember, we're screwing in from the bottom here. right? There's no way you're going to do that. And then put this screw in there, right? That's not going to happen. So we're going to use the smaller screws here, put it in. This thing is really light, right? So it's just going to mount like this, right? Underneath there. Now, the same thing applies. You got to measure across here, find the center, find the center of this, get everything lined up, and then we'll mark the holes with a Sharpie, or we'll just be brave and we'll just drill it and call it a night. No one's going to see it. So I'll make that decision and then I'll come right back. So back to our measurement before, it came out to the same thing, that 9 1/16 right there in the middle. And I measured this out, it's exactly 10 inches, and I put a line right there at 5. So we'll get that lined up, and then I'm just going to drill the holes. I'm not going to screw around with this too much longer. So we'll get that done, put some batteries in, and get the line set up. So off camera I went and I put in some batteries. It takes 4 AA batteries in the bottom here. So we're going to get that all situated, because once we screw this into the bottom, I don't want to have to crawl under there and put batteries in. Now, the other thing I did was, you'll see here, I tested it. I don't know if you can see it, but there's the line. Turned it on. So the line definitely works. So the batteries are good. Now that's not going to be on the wall, obviously, but we just want to check it and make sure that everything works properly before we start to get this all installed. All right, so let's get this underneath, and then we'll get everything lined up. Okay, I'm lining up that hole. Now, there we go. Now you want to be careful not to drill through the other side. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but you just want to make sure you're not drilling through the top part. Got that done. Now, I know I said before on the other one, you want to use the drill, but these screws are a lot smaller. You definitely want to use a screwdriver. All right, now the tricky part comes. Finding the hole. Oh, did I get it? Did I get lucky? Okay, we got it in there somewhat. Oh, no, we didn't. I did have it, but came out. All right, that was a bit more of a hassle than I really wanted. Those little tiny screws, kind of difficult to get up in there and screwed in. But we got it done. We got our line on the floor. So what we got to do now is measure it out. So I'll set the camera down here. All right, we get our tape measure. Now we want 93 1/4 inches. So that's roughly, lay this down, lock it in place. All right, we want 93 1/4 inches. Well, I think that's about as good as it's going to get. And there we go, 93 1/4, all done. So that's an official wrap. Now that we got the line set up, at 93 1/4. Measured that over. 5'8" to the center. Got the laser. See, there's a little switch here. You turn that off. Got everything situated on the wall. And we are ready to play. I know this is probably going to be long on the video, but hopefully you learned a few things, how to make measurements on the wall, get things all squared up and lined up. If you have a dartboard project of your own, hopefully this helps you get everything lined up and so you can play darts at your house. See you on the next one.